so alone. Abandoned. Where have the dev diaries gone? It's been years. Wait, what's this? It's Dev Diary Day? What would you like to see as the subject today? My God.
Hello and welcome back to another Dev Diary. It's been some time, but we're back with a new DLC. We have no idea what it's called, and we're going to be covering it in this first Dev Diary, which is rather long, all things considered. It kind of took me by surprise. So just moving straight into it, the first part of the Dev Diary covers what this DLC is going to be about, which is a shift back to the old DLC model we had around Death or Dishonor, where instead of getting a much larger DLC with lots more features added to the game, it's going to be what they call a country pack, where only 3 to 4 minor nations will get a focus tree with some additional bug fixes and smaller content added with it. Nothing major. So it's good that it's going faster, so you might be seeing 2 DLCs a year instead of just one of them being big, one of them being small. And this is the small one, which they say should release this year, 2020, at some point, probably towards the end of the year. Okay, so let's take a look at Greece itself. So they outsourced a freelance content designer for this one, so it's going to be somewhat original in how they think to design a focus tree. But that being said, looking at the focus tree itself, it does follow a very standardized format, and by standardized I mean this generic, there's an army tree, there's an industry tree, and there's a politics tree, and it doesn't really vary from that. It has 120 focuses in total, so looking at our graph of number of focuses per focus tree for each country, we can see that we're basically going to be a little bit less than Germany and a little bit more than Mexico, which, in I guess the coverage of things, is actually pretty good, all things considered. You'll see that a lot of these paths are mutually exclusive to follow. So we start with Greece in 1936, led by Konstantinos Demirtasis. I can never pronounce names. He's a royal puppet with terrible weekly stability, so you're probably going to get rid of that as soon as possible, with a whole host of national spirits due to Greece's crippling national debt and other terrible issues going on with it. So the Dev Diary follows the format that we start with the right side of the tree and make our way left. So that's exactly the format we shall follow too for discussing it. So looking at the army tree, it feels very base bones, sort of the kind of thing you'd expect from, as I say, one of the original Death or Dishonor DLCs. You have 3 paths, Air Force, Army and Navy. Each one has a split down the middle to decide between sort of big ships, small ships, defense attack, bombing or fighting, and then something at the bottom which gives you spirits. So pretty standard structure for how you'd expect a tree to work here. That doesn't mean there's some interesting stuff though. There is the Hellenic Academy plans, which you can use to give you good defense buffs if you're defending the country, which playing as Greece you're probably going to want. There's also a focus called Scrap the Greco-Turkish Naval Treaty, and I do wonder whether that is going to involve an actual treaty being removed or if it is just a research bonus. Moving on to their industry, which is the part of the focus tree I think is structured the best. I actually quite like it overall. It's a little bit simplified, but it's quite good to my thought of how it should be structured. So, the problem with Greece is its outstanding debt, as I'm sure we all know. And there are 2 kind of ways you have to deal with it. One being sticking to the formula of the Greece economy and trying to strengthen it, sort of keeping to their very specialised exports, or getting rid of all of the farmers and sticking them into factories. So the first focus of devaluating the drachma brings us on to this cool new mechanic of managing the debt to the IFC. As we can see here, you appear to have consumer good factories and stability loss due to the IFC debt, and using these decisions you can pay off that debt to get more consumer good factories back and increase your stability. I got to say, I really like this. I think this is a very, very good use of the decisions mechanic and how it integrates with the focus tree. It's interesting also that there's 2 parts of the focus tree to go down, and going down the more standardized 20th century industrialization path gets you the option to get large debt repayments, which increases the speed at which you can pay off your debt. After going down the focus tree even further, you are presented with the consequences of your actions, which is whether you cooperate with foreign monopolies or crack down on foreign monopolies. This is effectively you deciding which kind of designers you want. So you're probably going to want to decide which of these focuses you're going to get in advance, so that you can decide which material designers you want. With this is also these new investment schemes, which I also quite like actually. I think these are quite cool too. I always like how the decisions directly can influence the industry. I think that these two really should work together more often. So by spending political power, you might be able to get free factories thanks to your allies or sponsors. I think this is a good idea. As a side note, I do feel like if you're spending political power on getting factories, should you not be also acquiring more debt? If anything, you could have an option where you don't use political power and you actually increase your debt to gain more civilian factories. Therefore, there's a two-sided coin to this. Do you increase the industry but increase the debt, or pay off the debt but have a small industry at the end? It feels like these two could play off each other more. Okay, so moving on to the political focus tree itself. Now, a lot of this, for me, is open to interpretation, because it feels like they've said there's like 8 or 9 different potential leaders for your country. Like, there does seem to be a lot, from the king to Metaxism, 2 communist leaders. There seems to be quite a lot going on here. So forgive me if I do get something wrong. So half of this is interpretation. So, starting off, to pick your path, you have to decide on the 1936 election and whether the king will be involved or not. There is a decision, as seen here, which decides whether you can put him under house arrest in order to get your favoured outcome. If you go historical and you allow him to interfere, you have 2 paths. The historical path takes you down Metaxist faction, which allows you to pay off your debt and follow down his standardised plan of becoming a sort of dictator. This would be the true neutral path. The historical Greece sticks to themselves, you don't ask anyone for help, and you have to beeline straight down to the finish line in order to get all your buffs. There is a part though that if you do reach the focus called Reviving the Spartan Warrior Spirit, you will be able to keep all of your buffs and join a faction. If you join a faction before taking this focus, you lose all of the Metaxist buffs, and you're sort of letting yourself be open for invasion. On the other side, you've got the Metaxist recruiting the fascists and allowing them to follow in the footsteps of giants, which has got some nice focus tree art for it there. This allows you to follow through and form something called Helleno-Turkism, which is, as far as I can see, this tree is about trying to get Turkey to join you and the Germans in a mutual Axis agreement. And then I think you're supposed to sort of attack the Bulgarians halfway down the line, and then decide whether you want to stab Turkey in the back, or help Turkey and you all work together. Overall, to me this path seems rather weak. It seems to have just 1 war goal, potentially 2 if you go against Turkey, and doesn't allow for much beyond its own borders. I thought there could have been something to do with Albania. The complete lack of one of the major countries along your border, as well as Yugoslavia, seems shockingly lacking. I don't really understand it. This is why I think there's 2 focus trees for Turkey and Bulgaria, because these 2 countries will keep reappearing in these focus trees. If you choose to go down the monarchist path, you pick the right to rule, which sends you into a spiralling civil war. There is the option to ask the British for aid in your civil war, and after that it pretty much follows the same path as the Metaxist path. It can't be forgotten that on the far left there is a focus called Realign Ourselves with the Central Powers, which is interesting because there is so much old history in HOI4, but the focus trees never really align themselves towards the what if old history happens. However, if you go down your traditionalist allies in the Aegean, you can try and get back Cyprus, I think. And then once that's all done, you get your research slot. Next, faction. But when I say faction, I apparently mean actual factions this time, like factions within the country that are plotting against you. There's an entirely new sort of micro mechanic founded in the decisions, where you have these factions within your country that if they like you, give you buffs to stability and recruitable population factor, and if they dislike you, gives you negative debuffs towards your stability. And depending on which faction likes you or not, will determine which advisors you're allowed to get, because only certain advisors will help your government if that faction that they belong to like you. So as seen here, if you want Yanis Metaxas, you have to make sure that either the monarchist or the fascist faction likes you. I'm not 100% sure if there's going to be a decision system to increase their favour or not, or whether it's only based on the focuses you take. They didn't really show this, but from what I've seen, it does feel a little bit... It feels like there's a potential for it to be clunky. It could be really good, it could be, but without knowing more about it or how it interacts with the tree, I'm worried that it's going to feel kind of subverted beneath the actual gameplay. For example, there is an entire ideology system already in the game, which does have Democrats, Communists, Fascists, and non-aligned / monarchists. I feel like, why isn't there an interaction between the amount of political party support in your country and this decision system? If there are 0 communists in your country, why would you care what the attitude of the communists is, for example? Okay, we're almost done. We're almost there. We've basically seen most of the tree now, and as you can see, there's been quite a lot of mutually exclusive paths. I'm not sure how much you're going to be able to do. You're always picking between one or the other at some point, which is good. I think that choice is the way this game should be. I just hope there's enough focuses to quantify an entire game from 36 to 45. So moving on to the communist side, it starts off with us bringing home the Venezuelists, I think they're called. Basically an extremely republican faction working within Greece, does not like the king, get rid of him, get in a new socialist utopia for the rest of us. Now you could, if you're going to do this, request the communist support. Unfortunately, the communists are kind of all or nothing about this whole socialist thing, and will basically sideline the Venezuelists and create their own new communist utopia, which follows down this path here. The tree itself seems pretty straightforward. You kind of just follow down, get the focuses you need, work with the communists, before you get to a good doctrinal split down the bottom. I think these two paths have the opportunity to potentially be the most interesting. I think I like both of them. So, you can either prepare for the Great Anti-Fascist War, which allows you to get a war goal on Bulgaria, and you get to ally Joseph Broz Tito in Yugoslavia to help form a faction with him. This then gives you a war goal against Turkey. On the other side, we've got the Stlinist Line. Again, very interesting, especially the stage and incident at the Bosporus. As seen here, there's an entire gamble that you're supposed to partake in, where you need to decide whether to work with the Soviets to take the Bosporus Strait, where Constantinople, now Istanbul, is. This to me feels like one of the more grounded alt history paths. I don't know, I feel like the idea that they wouldn't be just an instantaneous conquest of Turkey is far more favourable, and more of a, we need to get hold of the Bosporus, can you help us by taking the Istanbul Strait? Greece says yes, off we go. I think this is favourable potential alt history, which isn't, anything crazy like Byzantium, because, well, would that happen? Anyway, moving on to Byzantium, we've got the democratic path. So instead of compromising with the communists, you can compromise with the monarchists. Now, the monarchists are far more appeasing to this massive Republican Party that's just appeared, for some reason. And with that, you get a new prime minister. Eleftherios Venizelos, I think is his name. Effectively, he is a massively powerful figure that this dev diary seems to be very much favourable to, who gives you massive buffs. The thing is, once he dies, all of those buffs that he gives you goes away. But now that the Republicans are back again, we move on to the bottom part of the tree, which is the Anatolian refugees. So the Megali idea is that there's a large part of Turkey which could harbour lots of Greek peoples, and by uniting all of this region, there is a larger Hellas state. I think this looks interesting, this idea that you're trying to reunite a larger territory of peoples. It doesn't feel so forced as to say, let's just conquer Turkey because we can. There is a good historical backing for it, being the previous Greek-Turkish war, although it does feel somewhat forced. I have to say this. I feel like if you're going in as a Republican Democrat in the middle of 1936, build up to World War II, the self-interest of the party versus the much larger threat of the looming World War II conflict feels a bit at odds with the core of the game. Like, if they were taking advantage of the opportunity to form Megali, I guess that makes more sense. But where's the interaction with World War II? It feels like Greece is just forming its own separate mechanic, and completely ignoring the fact that within, 3 to 4 years, Benito Mussolini is going to arrive with a rather big army on the Albanian border and conquer Greece. But never mind, let's see how this focus tree ends. So just before the finish, there's a split again, where you have to choose between horror and fear or the Gordian knot. So within this, there is a faction known as the EEE, who are sort of a alt-right, ethno-fascist party, and their belief is effectively, as far as I can tell, exactly the same as the Republicans with the Megali idea, except they want to do it with a hyper-aggressive expansionary route of, well, if we're in Turkey, we might as well conquer the whole thing. And I think this is the point where you decide whether you want to form Megali, which is the much smaller version, or the Byzantine Empire, which is of course the much bigger version of an expanded Greek state. It definitely feels strange that the democratic path has an option to very quickly turn fascist towards the end, and then form Byzantium, which is very odd. So once you've decided whether you're going to kick out the EEE and form Hellas, or if you're going to work with them and form Byzantium, you're pretty much done with the tree, and that kind of covers the entire focus tree. Once all is said and done, you should be looking with a map that looks something like this. There's Hellas, with taking most of its Greek portions. They appear to have divided up Turkey as well with the other powers, but what's far more interesting going on here is everything else. For starters, let's look in the east. What is this? What is this blue blob here, and why is it called Kurdistan? There is no other tag in the game called Kurdistan right now, which basically means I think this guarantees new releasable nations. I'm pretty sure I suggested adding Kurdistan at one point. I did a massive list of potential releasable nations that you could add to the game. So it's good to see that this one got added. There is, however, another one that I very distinctly don't remember recommending. The Vampires of Transylvania have returned. I wonder if there's going to be an option to completely divide up Romania and sort of cement it into different portions, or what's going on here. I genuinely can't tell what is going on in this region. I have no idea. All I hope is that some more interesting versions of this releasable nations seem to make their way into the game. So, we've talked about Hong Kong, we've talked about fragmenting Italy into some more sort of sub-states like Venice or something. Or not to mention a cheeky potential to make it so that the state of Texas becomes a little bit more independent. Okay, yeah, that's it. Dev Diary done. So I hope you enjoyed. If we should be covering some more stuff to do with this, so if you do want to see more, feel free to like and subscribe so you can watch more stuff. And I'll see you all next time. Okay, thanks. Bye.